The village of Abalama was once a place of balance, where men and women lived side by side, nurturing the land and raising their children together. The soil was rich, and the rivers teemed with life. But in time, as the village grew prosperous, the gods grew restless. They saw envy take root among neighboring lands, and war loomed on the horizon. The gods, ever protective of their chosen people, sought to intervene. Through their seer, Wine, the gods sent a warning. If men remained in Abalama, the village would face utter destruction. The gods commanded that henceforth, only women could remain in the village, for it was through women that the land's strength flowed. Male children were to be cast into the evil forest, where the spirits would claim them, and no man was to live among them. For decades, this law was followed, and the village of Abalama became known as a place where women ruled and fought with ferocity. They were feared and respected across the land, and none dared question their ways. In the shadow of Abalama's looming struggles was a woman named Nwanyi. She was one of the village's most skilled warriors, known for her sharp mind and unyielding spirit. She was respected by all, a woman of few words but great deeds. One night, as the full moon hung low over the village, Nwanyi gave birth. The labor was long and arduous, but she endured in silence, her strength unwavering. Finally, the cry of a newborn filled her hut, and the midwife handed her the child wrapped in a soft cloth. Nwanyi, exhausted but relieved, held the child close to her chest. But when the midwife pulled back the cloth to inspect the baby, her face went pale. "Nwanyi," she whispered, her voice trembling. "It is a boy." Nwanyi's heart stopped. A boy. A male child. She had known the risk, but deep inside, she had hoped for a girl, a daughter who could grow strong and live among the warriors. As her fingers brushed the soft skin of her son, she felt something strange, a warmth that seemed to pulse through her. A voice, soft yet powerful, whispered in her ear, "This one is chosen." Her heart raced as the voice echoed within her. She looked down at her son. He was so small, so vulnerable, but in her heart, Nwanyi knew the truth. This was no ordinary child. There was something divine about him, something the village would not understand. The midwife waited, her hand outstretched, but Nwanyi shook her head. "Leave us," she said softly but firmly. "I will take him." The midwife hesitated, confusion flickering across her face. She had never disobeyed the law, but Nwanyi's gaze was unwavering, and the midwife did not dare question her. Slowly, she backed away and left the hut. Nwanyi stared at her son. She could not explain the feeling that had taken hold of her, but one thing was clear. She would not give him up. The gods had spoken, and she would obey their will, even if it meant defying the laws of the village. For 10 years, Nwanyi kept her son hidden from the village. She named him Obi, a name that meant good heart. In the dead of night, she trained him in secret, teaching him the ways of the warrior, the same skills that had made her one of the village's finest. But while Obi learned the art of war, Nwanyi knew he would never be able to fight alongside the women of Abalama. The village would never accept him, not as he was. Yet she also knew that there was a greater purpose for her son, a destiny tied to the gods. During the day, Nwanyi would train with the other warriors, her face a mask of calm determination. No one suspected the secret she carried. But at night, in the safety of their secluded hut, she would continue Obi's training, whispering the ancient prayers of the ancestors and telling him stories of the gods who watched over them. But despite their careful secrecy, the village's unease grew. There had been whispers, rumors that Nwanyi was hiding something. The elders, especially the seer Wine, began to notice Nwanyi's absence during certain times of the day, and though she had always been a woman of few words, her guarded nature seemed more pronounced. Suspicion began to fester. Wine was a woman of great power, feared and revered in equal measure. She was the voice of the gods, and her visions had guided Abalama through the darkest of times. She had seen the rise and fall of empires in her dreams, and the women of Abalama trusted her without question. But lately, her dreams had been troubled. She saw fire and blood, destruction that swept over the village like a storm. One night, Wine went to the sacred shrine, where she often sought guidance from the gods. She knelt before the shrine, her hands trembling as she performed the rituals passed down through generations. As the smoke from the burning herbs filled the air, Hazewine entered a trance. The gods spoke to her in riddles, as they always did, but this time there was something different. The voice that came to her was not one of comfort, but of warning. "A child hidden in the shadows will bring ruin or salvation," the voice whispered. "He is both a curse and a blessing, but only if he is found will the village be saved." Hazewine's eyes flew open, her heart pounding. A child? The only children in Abalama were girls, and no boy had lived in the village for decades. But the gods had spoken, and she could not ignore their words. She needed to act, and she needed to act quickly. The next morning, Hazewine summoned the elders. They gathered in the council chamber, their faces grim. She told them of the vision, her voice steady but filled with urgency. The elders listened, their eyes narrowing with concern. "Are you suggesting that someone has defied the law of the gods?" one of the elders, Edora, asked. Her voice was incredulous, but there was an edge of fear in her tone. "I am not suggesting anything," Hazewine replied. "I am telling you what the gods have revealed to me. There is a boy hidden among us. We must find him, or our village will fall." The council erupted in murmurs. Such a thing was unthinkable. The law was clear, and the consequences of breaking it were severe. But Hazewine's visions had never been wrong before. If she said there was a boy, then there was a boy. The question was, where? Nwanyi's name came up almost immediately. She had always been different, and her recent behavior had not gone unnoticed. The council decided that Nwanyi would be watched closely, though no one dared accuse her outright. The women of Abalama were fiercely loyal to one another, and no one wanted to believe that one of their own would betray the village. Despite the growing suspicion around her, Nwanyi continued to live her life as normally as she could. But there were times when she felt the weight of eyes upon her, the whispers of doubt following her through the village. She knew it was only a matter of time before her secret was discovered, but she could not bring herself to abandon her son. Obi too sensed the change. He was no longer the carefree boy he had been. He understood the danger that hung over them, and though his mother had tried to shield him from it, he could feel the tension in the air. One fateful afternoon, while Nwanyi was away at training, Obi grew restless. He had always been careful to stay within the boundaries his mother had set, but curiosity got the better of him. He ventured further than he ever had before, drawn to the sounds of the women training in the distance. He watched from the shadows as the warriors sparred, their movements precise and deadly. For the first time, Obi felt the pull of something greater than himself. He wanted to fight alongside them, to prove that he was worthy of the destiny his mother had spoken of. But in his excitement, he lost his footing, stepping into the light. The nearest warrior, Nwanyi, caught sight of him immediately. Her eyes widened in shock, and she let out a cry. "A boy!" she screamed, her voice ringing out across the training grounds. The warriors turned in unison, their faces filled with disbelief. For a moment there was silence. Then the murmurs began, spreading like wildfire through the group. "Who is he? Where did he come from? This cannot be." Nwanyi rushed toward him, but Obi, quick on his feet, darted back into the forest, disappearing before she could reach him. The women were left in stunned silence, unable to comprehend what they had just seen. But there was no denying it. A boy had been in their midst. The council was called immediately. Nwanyi was summoned to stand before them, her heart heavy with dread. She knew that her time had run out. There was no escape now. When Nwanyi entered the council chamber, the atmosphere was tense. The elders sat in a semicircle, their faces stern. Hazewine stood at the center, her eyes fixed on Nwanyi with an expression of both sorrow and resolve. "Nwanyi," Hazewine began, her voice steady but filled with authority, "you have been accused of hiding a male child in our village. Is this true?" Nwanyi's throat tightened. She could lie, deny the accusations, but it would do her no good. The truth was out, and there was no point in hiding it any longer. "Yes," Nwanyi said, her voice barely a whisper. "It is true." A collective gasp rippled through the chamber. The elders looked at one another, their faces a mixture of shock and betrayal. Nwanyi had been one of their finest warriors, a woman they had trusted with their lives. To discover that she had broken the most sacred law of the village was unthinkable. "You know the law," Hazewine said, her voice trembling with emotion. The punishment for such a crime is banishment. Nwanyi lowered her head. She had known this day would come, but it did not make the words any less painful. She had given everything for her son, and now she would pay the price. Take her and the boy to the evil forest, Hazewine commanded. Let the spirits decide their fate. Nwanyi was escorted from the chamber in silence. As she walked through the village, the women turned away, unable to meet her eyes. They had loved her once, but now she was an outcast, a traitor to their people. Obi was waiting for her at the edge of the forest. He did not speak as she approached, but there was a look of understanding in his eyes. He had known, too, that this day would come. Together, they entered the evil forest, the place where so many male children had been left to die. But Obi was not afraid. The spirits of the forest seemed to welcome him, the trees whispering secrets only he could hear. Nwanyi, too, felt the presence of something greater than herself. She had feared the forest all her life, but now, walking beside her son, she realized that this was where they belonged. Back in Abalama, the village was in turmoil. The discovery of Nwanyi's secret had shaken the women to their core, and their confidence was beginning to waver. The war with the neighboring villages had intensified, and without Nwanyi, their ranks were weakened. The elders tried to rally the warriors, but something was missing. The women fought bravely, but they were losing ground. Their enemies were growing stronger, more organized, and they no longer feared the women of Abalama as they once did. The spirit that had once made Abalama invincible seemed to have been snuffed out, and defeat loomed on the horizon. In their desperation, the elders consulted Hazewine, pleading for guidance from the gods. But each time she entered the sacred shrine, the answers were the same. They had cast out the one chosen by the gods. Without Obi, there would be no victory, no peace. The weight of her decision to banish Nwanyi and her son weighed heavily on Hazewine's heart. The gods had been clear in their warnings, and she had been too blind to see it. The boy was no curse, he was their salvation. Yet now, with war on their doorstep and the women of Abalama falling in battle, she realized her mistake. But was it too late to make amends? One night, Hazewine had a vision more powerful than any before. She saw the village of Abalama in flames, the walls crumbling under the onslaught of their enemies. The screams of the women echoed in her ears, and blood soaked the ground. Amidst the chaos, a single figure stood, Obi, bathed in light, holding a staff that crackled with divine energy. The gods spoke to her again. Go to the boy, beg for forgiveness. Only he can save you. Only he can bring peace. Hazewine awoke, her body trembling with fear and revelation. She knew what had to be done. The gods had given them one final chance, but it was not without cost. She would have to humble herself, to admit her failure, and plead for the boy's mercy. The next morning, she called the elders together. Her face was lined with exhaustion, but her voice was resolute. I have seen the truth, she said. The boy Obi is not a curse. He is our only hope. The gods have chosen him to lead us to victory, but we have cast him out. If we do not beg for his forgiveness and that of his mother, we will fall. The war will consume us, and Abalama will be no more. The elders were stunned into silence. Hazewine, the woman who had banished Nwanyi, now stood before them admitting her mistake. They have spoken. We must go to the evil forest, find them, and beg for their return. Reluctantly, the elders agreed. Time was running out, and they had no other options. If they were to survive, they would have to seek out the very ones they had banished. Hazewine, accompanied by a small group of warriors, prepared for the journey into the evil forest. The women were fearful. No one ventured into the forest and returned. The spirits were said to claim all who entered, and the tales of strange beasts and ancient curses kept most of the village far from its borders. But Hazewine was resolute. The gods had given her a task, and she would not fail. The journey was long and treacherous. The thick canopy of the forest blocked out the sun, casting everything in an eerie twilight. Strange sounds echoed through the trees, and more than once, the women felt eyes watching them from the shadows. But Hazewine pressed forward, her heart guided by the gods' whispers. After days of travel, they finally came upon a clearing deep within the forest. There, standing in front of a small hut, were Nwanyi and Obi. They had not been harmed by the spirits. Instead, they seemed at peace, as if the forest itself had welcomed them. Obi had grown in the time since they had been banished. His presence was commanding, his once boyish frame now that of a young man. The air around him seemed to hum with a quiet power, and Hazewine knew immediately that this was no ordinary boy. The gods had blessed him. Nwanyi, too, had changed. She no longer carried the burden of fear or shame. She stood tall beside her son, her eyes calm but watchful. Hazewine fell to her knees before them, the warriors following suit. Nwanyi Obi, Hazewine began, her voice cracking with emotion. I was wrong. I have wronged you both, and in doing so, I have doomed our village. The gods have shown me the truth. You, Obi, are the chosen one. Only you can save us. I beg for your forgiveness, for the sake of Abalama. Nwanyi remained silent, her expression unreadable. But Obi stepped forward, his eyes fixed on Hazewine. I have always known my purpose, Obi said, his voice calm but powerful. The gods spoke to me long before you cast us out. My mother and I have found peace here, but the gods have also shown me what lies ahead. I will help Abalama, but on one condition. Hazewine looked up, hope flickering in her eyes. Anything, she said. Name your terms. I will lead the warriors into battle, Obi said. But after the war is over, Abalama must change. The old ways, the laws that banish men and divide us, must end. We must learn to live together, as we once did, or we will never know true peace. Hazewine hesitated for a moment, but she knew there was no other way. The boy was right. The gods had chosen him not just to save the village, but to reshape it. I agree, she said, bowing her head. The old ways will end. Then we will return, Obi said. But know this, when the war is over, Abalama will be different. The gods have spoken, and it is time for change. Hazewine and the warriors bowed low, their hearts filled with relief and gratitude. They had been given a second chance. When Obi and Nwanyi returned to Abalama, the village was on the brink of collapse. The enemy forces had gathered, preparing for a final assault that would decimate the village once and for all. The women, though brave, were exhausted and outnumbered. Obi's arrival was met with awe and disbelief. The warriors who had once scorned him now looked to him with hope. His very presence seemed to reinvigorate them, and with him at the helm, they prepared for the final battle. The day of the battle dawned cold and gray. The enemy forces approached from the north, their banners flying high. But Obi stood tall, flanked by the women warriors of Abalama. He held a staff, one that crackled with divine energy, a gift from the gods. As the enemy surged forward, Obi raised his staff, and a great wind swept across the battlefield. The sky darkened, and the ground trembled beneath the enemy's feet. The women of Abalama charged, their spirits renewed, fighting with a ferocity they had not known in years. Obi fought at the front, his movements swift and precise. The power of the gods flowed through him, and with each strike, the enemy fell back. The women of Abalama, inspired by his strength, pushed forward, overwhelming their foes. The battle raged for hours, but in the end, the women of Abalama stood victorious. Their enemies lay defeated, their forces scattered to the wind. The village of Abalama had been saved, and it was Obi who had led them to victory. With the war over, the village of Abalama celebrated its victory. Obi was hailed as a hero, the savior of their people. But true to his word, he did not allow the village to return to its old ways. The laws that had once banished men were abolished. Abalama became a place where men and women lived together once more, side by side. The women warriors remained strong, but now they were joined by their sons and brothers, who learned to fight alongside them. Hazewine, humbled by her experiences, stepped down as the seer. She passed her role to another, one who would guide the village into its new era. And though Nwanyi had been wronged, she chose to stay in Abalama, not out of duty, but out of love for the land and the people. She no longer sought vengeance or retribution. Her heart was full of pride for her son, who had fulfilled the destiny the gods had placed upon him. She trained new generations of warriors, men and women alike, teaching them not just the art of combat, but the importance of unity and balance. Obi, though still young, was no longer the boy hidden in the shadows. His role as the chosen one had brought peace to Abalama, and the villagers revered him not as a warrior, but as a symbol of change. The old ways of exclusion were gone, and with the blending of the once separated men and women, Abalama thrived as never before. Under Obi's guidance, Abalama opened its gates to neighboring villages, not in war, but in peace. Alliances were forged, and the once hostile neighbors began to see Abalama not as a threat, but as a beacon of strength and prosperity. Trade routes flourished, and knowledge flowed between lands. Abalama became a symbol of a new age, one where men and women stood side by side, no longer divided by fear or superstition. The people no longer feared the evil forest. It was no longer a place of exile, but a sacred land watched over by the spirits. Occasionally, the villagers would venture to its edges to honor those who had been taken, leaving offerings for the souls lost there. But it was also a place where the spirits of the forest communicated with Obi, guiding him as he continued to fulfill his role as a protector and leader.